Welcome to the We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast, a thought-provoking series that tackles the big questions such as how do we cultivate a well-centered life in a world that often feels unbalanced? And what role does spirituality play in solving today's personal and collective problems? My guest today is Tyler Chay, a former collegiate wrestler and a longtime friend. The fall of 2024, Tyler and his wife Nikki spent 38 days in war-torn Ukraine, where they ran from the Romanian border to the front lines of the war and engaged with the Ukrainian people. Tyler shares his evolving understanding of spirituality, shaped by personal experiences and cultural influences. Tyler recounts his journey and discusses the spiritual problems observed in California and Ukraine. Our discussion also highlights the need for forgiveness and understanding in bridging divides, as well as the role of individual actions in fostering peace. We explore the psychological and economic impacts of war, the significance of education for displaced children, and the role of individual action in supporting those affected. Tyler shares insights from his experiences in Ukraine, emphasizing the need for resilience, advocacy, and appreciation of freedom. This conversation is a call for listeners and viewers to engage in meaningful ways to support one another. Well, Tyler, welcome to the We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast. I've been wanting to have you on here for quite some time, even before the conception of this. I think I wanted to talk to you about your trip to the Ukraine. Before we kind of kick into that, let's just kind of start off with, how do you kind of define your perception of spirituality or your philosophical perception? How has that shaped your worldview?
I would say, spirituality for me, that word's kind of shifted around and changed, especially as I've grown into my 30s. I just turned 30 a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
Um,
that's making me feel old now, you know that. Since we
I
met
know,
when
man.
you were, a junior in high school?
Yeah. And I'm looking back at all like the all phase guys and the little kids that we used to train with, and now they're competing at like the highest college level now too. So that's a trip.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, to go back to your question about spirituality, I mean, mainly, yeah, I grew up as a Catholic, and I grew up around a very Korean and Italian household. Um, Going to Catholic masses most Sundays growing up, kind of just as a family. But really, I didn't believe in much at that point in my life. I was really kind of just going along just for traditions and just for kind of to appease my family, to be honest. And as I got into college, I kind of started to wonder what spirituality actually was like internally for myself. And so I started to kind of dive into a little bit more like Buddhist and like uh, Tibetan kind of culture and Eastern philosophies of thinking. And I tried that out for a few years, and I felt some bits of pieces of peace within myself, but I didn't feel like a whole. I think really what ended up happening was I started to realize that it really wasn't as much of like a communal spirituality as it was like just an internal, intrinsic spirituality for myself, which I think is a component. But really what I've realized, I've grown to become a Christian here in the last couple years of my life as well. And really kind of what's come full circle is this idea of community inclusive with service as well. I think is a big part of spirituality to me that I didn't really see so much when I was younger. But as I've grown older and I start to look at the legacy of my life, I start to realize that what we provide and pass down to not only like the next generation, but just to the people around us, I think that's a huge component of spirituality to myself. And I've kind of used this like lens of my belief in God and to analyze myself and almost use it as like an X-ray and to navigate the right and the wrongs in my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And that's a great definition, I think, of spirituality. It kind of reflects what I believe too, where it extends beyond just our religious convictions and our traditions. It is that internal piece, but the outternal piece, it's like kind of taking what is within and transferring that to kind of without, if that makes any sense.
Totally. It has to be applicable. I think that's the biggest part to me is that I think when I was meditating a lot in college and kind of using that as like a decompression period, especially after doing like physical activities, like strenuous physical activities like wrestling, I started to realize that it actually gave me more energy and it felt really good to serve others in my pastime too. And not
Mhm.
to say that like slowing down and relaxing and, having that time of recovery is important and a part of spirituality as well. But I think like overwhelmingly the feeling I'm getting lately towards spirituality is that it is connected and it's like a sense of gathering that almost needs to happen daily for you to like continue that practice. Cause I do believe that you have to like kind of humble yourself each day before God to really kind of have him work through you as well, or to be able to listen to him.
So when you hear the phrase, we have a spiritual problem, what's that mean to you?
Um, Man, it's tough. I think there's a spiritual problem almost probably anywhere that you go. It just manifests itself in different ways. The two closest examples I could give you in my life is that California. I live in Southern California. I have probably the most like beautiful views, like top 1% of the world could possibly live in, the places that we're living in right now. But there is like a sense of spiritual brokenness that I see sometimes, like a feeling of not enough, whether it's physically or monetarily or emotionally. You can kind of just tell that people find that it seems to me that sometimes people find a problem or arise a problem if one isn't there. And it feels like we have everything kind of taken care of for us in this moment. And California has so many amazing things, but there is like a little piece of like, there always feels like something's always being chased after here. And there's a feeling of like, man, maybe I'm not enough. And that's a tough thing here in California, I think. And then I think in my experience in Ukraine specifically too, and we can dive into that project as well. But I felt like a little bit of spiritual, like there was a spiritual problem as kind of as the world looks in on this issue. It's difficult because Ukraine is an invaded country. It has been, there's been millions of people displaced, and my friends have gone through a city that's been completely ransacked, and hundreds of thousands of people in their region have been, either killed or moved away. And there's a little bit of a spiritual disconnect, I think, because a lot of people are, I think they really want to look at the other side as people, and they really want to look at the situation as, I think they're all looking for peace in the situation too. And I think it's really difficult for them because they've had so many atrocities happen to them, um, that I think it's hard for them to like spiritually like forgive the other side. Ultimately, I think what's going to need to happen is that level of forgiveness, for them to move forward. But it's really difficult. It's
I'd
really, really
imagine.
difficult when you start to, when family members have been affected by attack.
What inspired you to go to the Ukraine? And first, I guess I should have you explain what you and your wife Nikki did in in the Ukraine, and just talk about why you did it and what you hope to accomplish by doing so.
Yeah. So me and my wife Nikki, we ran across the country of Ukraine in a support to help our friends relocate their community from. Mainly, our friends are from this community called Mariupol, which is almost like a neighboring city of the Russian border, or the formal Russian border, before the occupation. And our friends were moved, kind of displaced all throughout Europe, and there was a heavy need and want from them to go back into Ukraine to continue serving, not only on the front lines, but they had one of the former Soviet Union's largest children's rehabilitation and orphanage center, and we actually had met them here in America and had met a lot of the refugees here in America and been spending time with them, and we were just really inspired by the stories that we were hearing. We had learned a lot from our friends who had been serving with them for like over a decade. And we just wanted to see it firsthand for ourselves. Me and Nikki had already been saving up a lot in our lives to kind of take like a year abroad. We were actually planning on kind of traveling around the world and doing a bunch of ultra marathons around the world. Um, but really, we got like this strong sense of like service put into our heart for some reason. And I think that probably happened um, preluding to Ukraine. Even we were going on some service trips. I had been participating kind of in my local church too, and meeting with like a men's group and serving like the local community that we had. Nikki had been spending a lot of time with the women from Ukraine here in California, and then me and Nikki decided to go to Kenya before Ukraine and do some service there as well. And we just felt like really ignited. We felt like very purposeful. And selfishly, it felt really good to serve other people. And it gave us a lot of energy. And yeah, I think really what led us into this Ukraine trip was this coupling of, hey, here's running and ultra marathoning and something physical that we absolutely love to do with our lives. And then here's something that really makes us feel purpose driven and um, just provides a high level of energy. And I felt like that was like where the meshing came into it. We went to go visit Ukraine early last year for a couple months. We weren't even sure like how we were going to support people at this point, but we knew that we kind of wanted to mesh our talents and our abilities to match what we could do for them. So we ended up going out to the country. We toured um, everything from the far western side of the country all the way to the front lines, to the capitals and some of the major cities in Ukraine. We ended up meeting with some of the major partners, and we decided to support the children's home that we saw out there and like the reestablishment of our friends in this new community. So we designed this challenge with our friends and with our partners out there. We designed we wanted to make it a little bit more of like, we wanted to make it an interesting story for people too, because at that point, we had been training pretty well. We knew that we could go like a far distance, but we never really thought about doing it so consecutively. So we ended up choosing a route that started at the Romanian border and went all the way to the front lines of Ukraine. Um, and it really was a strategic point because the children's home is only like an hour away from the front line or the border of Romania. And then the frontline city of Zaporozhye is actually where a lot of the men continue to serve and volunteer. So really, it was like a strategic route. Not only were we seeing the country from west to east, but we were passing by some of the major cities, like pretty much almost every major city we were passing by in Ukraine to meet with government officials. We were meeting with run clubs, we were meeting with athletic organizations, and really like the government body was like very friendly to us. And a huge reason why we're doing this run as well was not only to raise money and awareness overseas, but really to raise awareness for this new community entering this new part of Ukraine. I mean, you can imagine if we were invaded here in California and me and Nikki had to pack up our bags and move to New York, you have to reestablish your community. You have to, if you own a business, and they own a nonprofit with an orphanage. So a lot of like the restrictions and sanctions that were kind of like more easily lifted on them in a community that knew them very well and had trusted them for decades. They were in this completely new area. And a main reason why we did this run too was to just make sure that their presence was known in the country, that they weren't going anywhere, and that they were kind of like establishing this new home in a safer part of Ukraine in the West.
And what do you think you learned from the experience?
Oh man, that's tough. I would say the one me and Nikki continually fall back on is the power of presence, and I mean that in the sense of I think distance can be a little bit of an enemy sometimes, especially when we're dealing with something so complicated like this war. It's not a very black and white thing. I mean, we could say like black and white in terms of like who invaded who, or kind of who started the aggression, but in terms of you know how we're going to end the situation, or like who was in the right and who was in the wrong for doing all these different acts. It's very messy. It's the fog of war that kind of happens. And I would say like the biggest thing that I learned is presence, this power of like sharing a meal with somebody and being in their hometown and like spending this time with children and people that are like really affected, and being face to face with them, it's very, very different than watching the news, right? It's very different than kind of like being presented a curated story. Um, as opposed to kind of just like going out and investigating it for yourself. But also, just like this power of presence to me means that I learned how much it means to show up for someone during a hard time, and like the emotional reaction that we got out of some people. I have a lot of journal entries and things that we recorded along the way. A lot of like awesome film and documentation that we did too, that really like highlighted these little moments that we were having with people, whether it's a lady on the side who's selling fruit, um, or someone in a church that we're having service with, or a government official. It's like you could just tell like people were massively touched by this action that we were doing, and that power of presence, I think, was probably the largest lesson that I learned.
So somebody might say, well, what do you really expect to accomplish in a global situation like the Ukrainian war by just simply running across the country? What would you say to somebody in response to that question?
Yeah, no, it is a good question. I think we weren't trying to change the world with this. I think my main message to people is you can always start with one person, like there's always somebody in your community, like your local community, your state community, your federal community, whatever. Like you can expand it as internal to external as you want. Obviously, not everybody's going to want to go global like we did. Um, but yeah, I don't think we were out to change the world, but I think there's a power to just helping one person and one community or one thing. And I think if more of us did that, this world would be left a better place. It might be cheesy, but I do
No,
believe
that
it.
is absolutely not cheesy. I totally agree with you. I think if you can affect one life, you've affected the world. And I think we don't manage to understand that. And that's part of the purpose of this podcast is to get people thinking whatever your specific beliefs, whether you are a person of faith, how you define God, if you define God, or if you're an atheist, you still have a place in this world and you still have a need to express empathy and benevolence and be present, as you said, for other people. And I think that is a key issue with what's going on, not only between Russia and the Ukraine, but many of the other conflicts across the world. And I applaud what you did because I do think it brings just a light of hope not only to the Ukrainian people but also to those of us that were on the receiving end, getting to watch you guys over. How many days were you running? I can't remember. Was it like 30
We were
days or?
there for 38 days, like consecutively, like on the project, but that included like government meeting days and meeting up with run clubs and all this different stuff. But it was 27 days of marathons. Yeah,
Right. That's a lot of marathons.
it's a lot of marathons.
How many
Last year we
miles is
did,
that?
it was 750 miles total. But there were a few like smaller runs baked in there.
I couldn't do it. I could
Yeah.
maybe drive that in 38 days, but
Over the course of 6 months, we did 40 marathons.
oh.
That was a lot last year.
No, but you definitely brought attention to the issue, and we'll get back into a little bit more about kind of where your thoughts are and where we are in that situation right now and where we can move forward. But what roles do you feel that concepts like compassion, forgiveness, mindfulness, and those types of things play in solving these spiritual problems, and particularly problems of war and conflict between peoples?
Oh man,
Told you I was going to ask hard questions today. So,
I know. Well, this one's really difficult because I was really curious about it, and I asked. I asked when I was over there, and it's a little bit split. It's like a little bit of, some people are really, really angry. Some people are like, and they don't really want to have another opinion. And I think that it's just going to take a little bit of time. But I mean, we're talking about like horrific things happening to family members in a close circle. And then I hear also things that have happened to horrific people, and they kind of have a different mindset of, there has to be this sense of forgiveness eventually, and there has to be this sense, because I think the overwhelming feel too is that it's not necessarily like Russian people that are doing this, but more like the regime of like kind of like the government body that's pushing this agenda forward. And that's where it's tough. I think ultimately forgiveness is probably where things need to be led. But obviously it's very hot. It's a very hot issue right now. And people continue to die both on both sides. So
Right.
it's it makes it even more difficult for that forgiveness too.
Yeah, I think every death that occurs just makes it that much harder to forgive and just creates that much greater of a rift between the peoples. How do you think people can begin to foster a sense of purpose or connection, even if they don't identify with a specific faith or belief system? I mean, you talked about it just kind of evolved for yourself. Do you have any kind of words of advice for people, what they can do to foster a sense of connection amongst themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting uncomfortable a little bit and like getting into like a small group setting, I think that's really what's worked for me. Like, especially whether it's for guys or girls, like you could try a few different things. You could try like small groups for men or for women or a mixed group of couples. I just think like if you're not feeling it right now, maybe just doing something a little bit different and just keep on exploring and keep on digging. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think we all kind of find our philosophy with faith eventually. And it also probably shifts with time as we gain more wisdom or are going through trials and tribulations. I think that like purpose that drives our faith can kind of shift, and that's okay too. But the main thing I think is just like seeking it. Like a biblical thing for me is just ask, seek, and knock, and then you'll receive some answers. So,
So are there ways that we can bridge some of the divides between peoples, whether it's, the Russians, the Ukrainians, or, Democrats, Republicans in this country? I mean, Californians and Texans. Yeah, we can go down the list of all the different divisiveness, that, dividing factors in this country. But, are there ways that we can bridge those divides with people that are different in terms of spiritual or philosophical perspectives? Especially if we're trying to work toward a shared goal. I would hope that a shared goal in this situation is peace.
it, yeah, I think peace definitely is the goal. And I mean, for this one specifically, if we're talking about Ukraine and Russia and the peace, and I mean, I think we've heard a lot of the stories that have come out recently with Zelensky's visit to the White House as well. Um, it's tough. It's tough because I think Ukraine is just looking for some sort of security that what happened the last couple years won't happen again. And well, sorry, what was your question again?
Just ways that we can bridge, some of the divides that exist between people, whether they're of different spiritual or philosophical perspectives.
I think in America specifically, if I'm talking about America specifically, I would say just having like that room for gray, you know, that things aren't very black and white. I think it's probably parallel here to Ukraine as well. Um, I have a little bit more of an opinion on, like, obviously the Ukraine was invaded and um, that was their sovereign land. Um, but it is a very gray area. It's like you look back onto the history of Ukraine and the involvement with the Soviet Union, and there's a lot of moving parts, especially when you talk about Crimea. But then it's a whole nother issue currently today with this land being occupied. But I would say, like, in terms of bridging that divide, it's just people having like a willingness to have the conversations, I think, especially as like people not in governmental positions. It's like, I think we should take the stance of a little bit more humility. It's okay to have our opinions and to to be Republican or liberal or anything in between, but just to have like the decency to respect somebody's opinion and let them talk it out, to be able to say why they think something's wrong or to not snip them off anytime short. I think that's a tactic I'm seeing a lot in news and in American culture lately is just like a little bit of short-sighted black and white behavior that I think could improve to ultimately get us in a position and a posture of like humility a little bit more. and to hopefully make a little bit more of like a focused and good decision on how to move forward.
How optimistic are you that that's going to happen?
Not crazy optimistic, to be honest. If I'm being completely honest, I don't know. I don't think, and if we're talking about this Ukraine war, I don't really know if anybody knows what's going to happen. I think everybody's just crystal balling it. After, from what I'm reading, it looks like potentially Europe might start increasing military spending and defenses. And so ultimately, it might end up being a really good thing, not only for America, but for Europe and for the inclusion of Ukraine. Um, I'm optimistic. I'm always hoping for the best, but obviously a lot of it's out of our control too. And I've really tried to stay. I didn't really realize, crazy enough, how political Ukraine was once we stepped in. Only until like we got emotionally invested did I realize like how much of a political trigger this war is and this country is.
So why did you get involved? If it wasn't a political thing for you, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was strictly a people thing for me. It was our friends from here in California. Me and my wife had made really good friends with them. And then they took us to Kenya and ultimately took us to Ukraine as well. And um, we met the people there and like they became very, very close to us within, I mean, we were living on the same properties with them and kind of like getting toured and meeting their family. And kind of exploring on our own and getting to meet locals. And it was just overwhelmingly, it was just like hey, we really want to support these people, you know? And it was the same feeling that I had in Kenya with Nikki when we were like a main mission for us going into Kenya was like, hey, we just want to support one family. Like, let's just go out here and let's go find one family that like really touches our heart and let's go support them like in the long term and see what happens. And we still continue to do that today. And that was like our full intention going into that. And I felt like the same thing was for Ukraine. And then, yeah, kind of unwinding it, I didn't really realize how political it got and how averse some people were to even wanting to have a conversation about it because of their political beliefs.
So what if the situation was kind of flipped, where you would build a relationship with people who were more refugees from from Russia? I wanted to say the Soviet
Mhm.
Union. That's showing my age, but um, do you think you would have a different perspective, or how do you think your mind would have shifted?
Yeah, that's a good
That's a
question.
tough question, but
No, I've thought about that too because I mean I'm an athlete and like the in a wrestling community and it's like the top wrestler all are U.S., Russia, and Iran, right? It's like I've always kind of like looked at Russia as like the top tier of like physical sports, really. And I actually we have Russian refugee friends here, so it's not like we're completely disconnected from like Russian people as well. And I actually have a huge heart for Russian people because it's some of the stuff they have to deal with is just a little bit insane.
yeah.
And I think a lot of them don't like it either. But they can't say nobody can say anything in that country. There's like no freedom of speech. But I don't know. Potentially, I've thought about that. Like, well, what if I went to go wrestle in Dagestan for like a couple months and had made really good friends with those guys. And I have like a large amount of empathy or sympathy for the people living there, especially those that are just like want nothing to do with this war. Um, yeah, for me, it's a little bit hard. I wonder if that would be the case. It's just difficult when I have like the perspective of being invaded versus the invader. Mhm.
And it all comes down
Yeah.
to political leadership. It's not the people. I mean, the
Mhm.
people get sucked into the middle of wars, and I'm sure that most of the Russian people would just prefer to leave the borders alone and get along with their neighbors and work in a way that it's productive for everybody.
Mhm.
But I think if you look from the political standpoint, the Russians aren't going to be settling for peace unless they get their access to waterways and they get their land back and they get. And for the Ukrainian people, it seems like just we just want to be left alone to be able to develop our lives and our families. And
Yes. And to have some sort of guarantee that, man, you're not going to just like bulldozer over us again.
yeah,
So it's tough. It's a tough situation. I think ultimately like peace is what everyone's looking for. I think it's just like a little bit more nuanced than just signing a piece of paper that says, you know, no more firing.
Yeah. So how do you see it ending there?
I have no idea, to be honest. I'm hoping that Europe engages a little bit harder economically to support them, and also bumps up its military. I hope the relationships between America and Ukraine continue to get better. And hopefully between Europe and America, hopefully we can come to some sort of deal where this thing's over. Um, but it does feel like Ukraine's getting a short end of the stick here. I just don't know if there's any avoiding it at this point, to be honest. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that there's going to be a deal that ultimately works out for them in the long run here.
I mean, peace, we got to have peace.
Yeah.
And peace at what cost is the big question right now. And who's willing to pay that cost, or who should pay that cost? And that's when it starts getting political, who should pay. But ultimately, it should not be the people that are paying.
As much of a, you know, war is as much of a financial game.
From interacting with the people in Ukraine, what do you think? Well, I shouldn't say what do you think, because I think what did you hear from them? What they most want us to know about their circumstances and their situation right now?
I think they would want us to know that, like, I think there's like a heavy amount of appreciation for the support that America's given to Ukraine up to this point. I think they know that they couldn't have done it without us too. So there's an overwhelming amount of appreciation from the people, especially as we were running across the country. Um, I mean, I think it's just it's a dire situation over there where it wasn't just like this flourishing, massively developing country before. It's Eastern Europe, right? And so I think ultimately they'd probably just want us to know that it's not like the best situation, right? It's like it is it's a little bit of it's a little bit chaotic, especially the further east you go. And a lot of these people's homes and cities and places where, kind of we've maybe take for granted a little bit in such a peaceful place, but literally like just sitting here in my apartment, I'd have to worry about air sirens or drones or things like that. I think there's just a high level of underlying stress that these people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so many men lost and so many men continue to fight on the war on the front lines. It's going to take a huge psychological and health hit to their community as well, with all these men returning home from war after seeing such atrocities. Um, I'd probably think that the people there would want us to know that they're appreciative of the support and that it is a very difficult time.
So, if a peace agreement could be signed today, what do you think it's going to take to get the Ukraine back to a normal, healthy, productive state?
So I think if a peace agreement really does come into place, and if there's like guarantees and securities that Russia isn't able to enter back into the country, I do feel like there will be money, because there's a lot of people that took their money out of Ukraine, local Ukrainians. There's people that like kind of moved out of the country. I have a feeling there's going to be a little bit more of a cash injection towards the country, and a lot hopefully goes into the stabilization of their economy. I mean, that's going to be like probably one of the biggest things for them to really like solidify after this war. Um, but I would think it probably takes, I can't even tell. It's going to take a few years for sure for them to like really rebuild uh, what has been destroyed. They do a really good job already about like making sure that nothing's like just blown out and just like, there's like buildings all over the roads and nobody can't drive over it. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of like rebuilding and renovations and stuff like that that needs to go into place in the country. I would say probably one of the bigger issues too is like what I was talking about before. I think there's going to be a big psychological issue, um, and there's probably going to be therapy and people to just be able to lean on in a spiritual sense too. These people have gone through a lot, and I think a lot of them don't even know like the amount of stress and cortisol and these like maybe toxic level of you know high endorphins that they're just like rush shooting through their body constantly. And it might be a little bit of like a dump at the end and like a sigh of relief. And yeah, I hope psychologically more than anything, these people stay strong through this thing because life looks a lot different. I think once borders open back up, airplanes are able to travel back into the country, transit and imports and exports start to pick up again too. So it's kind of like this open floodgate that I see a little bit more towards people entering back in for tourism and all these different things that I think will hopefully help build up back that like socioeconomic part of Ukraine again. Um, but I have a feeling it's going to take some time as well. It won't be immediate, but I do feel like people will probably be more willing to support and invest back in Ukraine once this is over.
And what kind of damage has been done there? I mean, we can think of damage from the spiritual point of view, the physical, the infrastructure, but also intellectually. We have kids that are probably, I don't know to what extent they're getting educated during all of this with schools and whatnot, just the emotional strain. And then, of course, always there's going to be that bit more of a social healing that's going to need to take place between the Russian and the Ukrainian people, and
Mhm.
quite possibly the American people if we continue to kind of turn the screws on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the damage from like a child's point of view, I mean, there's been millions of people displaced, not only across Ukraine, but all across Europe too. So we're seeing kids in Spain and Germany and France and all these different parts of the world, including America, that have kind of just been shoved into like a new schooling system that they're not even speaking the language yet. I would think like develop mentally, like for a child, that's going to be pretty difficult to just like uproot yourself like that. And your parents don't speak the language too. So you're speaking either Russian or Ukrainian back at home in your household, which probably isn't making it any easier as well. Um, I think from like an educational standpoint, people have been trying to shift a lot more online too. I know that the orphanage that we support out there, they do a lot of online, but they also have like physical tutors and person that kind of comes by for psychological things. But most people aren't that lucky. Most people are, living normal kind of normal lives on like large pieces of land. And usually kids either walk to school, ride their bike to school, or something like that. Really, most of the schools in the eastern part of Ukraine have been affected. Western parts, not so much. Most of it has been kind of um, going on as normal. Obviously, people feel the effects of the war, but the eastern side is really where you see majority of like the physical damage. So as we like found our way into maybe like 60 miles, 70 miles of the front line areas, you start to really see the damage pick up. You start to see, apartment buildings, hospitals, universities, police stations. I saw almost every single kind of building destroyed. And those majority of those are targeted attacks. Um, they're targeted towards hospitals to try to get rid of doctors in the area. I mean, it's really a psychological part of these bombings is because they want people to be scared to live in them. So, I mean, they're hitting infrastructure. They're hitting places of like you're not supposed to be doing any places of large gatherings at this point, like anything over 100, people in one place, and cell phones are all pinging in one area. It definitely becomes more of a target area as well. Um, but yeah, as further east you go, the more devastation you see, and that kind of trickles down all the way from the elderly all the way down to the to the young kids. The elderly are a lot of them are a little bit stubborn, and in the eastern parts, and even so, like kind of like where the front lines start, they call them gray areas because they're not really occupied by Ukraine or Russia at this point. And there's still old people that live in these areas and they live underneath basements. And I mean, talking about like hundreds and hundreds of people live that basically said, this is our land. And if we're going to die, it's okay. But I'm not going to leave because they know they have to basically start their life anew. And I mean, these people are like 60, 70, 80, 90, living in a basement for 3 years. It's insane. And those are some of the people that our friends help on the front lines too, because they don't have access to water, they don't have access to food. They're constantly under artillery shelling as well. Um, but you can kind of just see like everybody's a little bit of everybody is dealing with something the closer you get to the Eastern Front.
So what can we do? All of us listening to this podcast or engaging in this podcast, what can we do today to be a solution?
I would say, I always go back to just like helping that one person or that one thing in your life that really sticks out. I don't think everyone's going to be called to the things that me and my wife do or are going to do in the future. But I would just say, man, I could harp on, why I believe, Ukraine is righteous in the situation, why we should support them, and why, you could contribute your physical dollars, your time. But I really do think that everybody has like this one person or this one thing in their heart, and to just go after it, to really go support it to your fullest. If it does happen to be, the organization that we support or the people that we support, that's amazing. But really, I think the most genuine, the most like heartfelt, and the most amount of like excitement and energy that you usually bring into something is when you actually care about it. I would just tell people, to listen in if they want to. Look at different news sources when you're looking at this issue. Obviously, when you're watching CNN and Fox, you're going to get two very different news outlets. Try to just make your own opinions about what's going on here in this war, just like any war. Um, and to just realize that there's a gray area, right? There's not like this black and white answer. And I think America is going to do the best for not only Ukraine, but America, and is just going to make the best decision that we think is possible at this time and with the leadership that we have. And it's just going to be the way that it is. But I mean, like, I guess from a spiritual standpoint, I do like have a little bit more hope in the situation, because I do feel like God is looking after not only us here, but my friends over there. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be okay. As horrible as the situation as it is, I've seen, I can list like so many stories of the terrible, terrible things that I've seen, but I'm hopeful because they're hopeful. And that gives me a lot of strength, actually, because I feel like I have a soft, cushy life compared to my friends that are there, and they're a great like perspective change for me. But yeah, just anybody, just go for it. If you feel it, go for it. And that's like probably one of the biggest messages, and to just be an advocate, not only for like something as big as we're doing, but just like be an advocate for like your wife and your family, and like that kid in your wrestling club who's like working his ass off and is having a hard time. And I think we can do a lot of those little things and branch it out as far as you want. But I think God calls us and puts that little seed into our hearts for a reason.
It sounds like the way to peace is the small things that we can do with one another. Who we can impact today is the avenue to peace. And it may not be that we are able to go and actually physically interact with the people of the Ukraine or wherever there might be other war-torn problems or economic problems across the globe. But if we can affect a life here, our neighbor who can affect somebody who's maybe in the position to change those situations, then we've done something.
Yeah, to just be in a position of service. I mean, I think that's a great way to do it, and it doesn't have to be big actions. It could just be like these little steps and consistent steps that kind of like lead you towards. Because you have no idea like what one little thing will do for somebody. And I think for me, that's faith. That's like God's love for us, is that we don't know. That was like one of the big messages that I heard from the pastor that we were supporting out there, was that we don't know how deep, how wide, and how understandable God's love is for all this around us. We have no idea.
They respond to that person. It's maybe the cynical non-believer that's saying, well, what kind of God would allow this to be happening?
Yeah, it's tough, right? It's like I think those questions come into your mind when horrible things are happening. Um, I would say there's just as much good as there is a bad in this world, if not more sometimes. And I think that's equally as like the flip side of that question is like, why is there all this good? And why am I capable of good? And why can I connect with people? It's like I could always ask the flip side of those questions. And I think it's appropriate to ask the flip side of those questions, just like I think it's appropriate, right, to if we're watching, you know, two different news sources, I think it's just like you should maybe be a little bit more curious on like the backside or the reverse of it. And I think that's always like a fun little test to do with yourself because I think it just draws up a little bit more of like the oh yeah, like a sense of like curiosity and wonder instead of feeling like you're pigeonholed and driving towards one place.
You made me think of the Arthur Ashe story, and I don't know if you would know Arthur Ashe. You're a young kid still, even though you're going to be 30, making me feel old. But Arthur Ashe, I forget when he died. Whether it was in the 1990s, I believe, but he died of AIDS. He was a hemophiliac. He was a professional tennis player, probably one of the greats. Um, and when he contracted AIDS, well, HIV through blood donation or blood transfusion, people were asking him, well, do you ever ask yourself, ask God, why me? And he was like, well, if I have to ask God, why me in this situation, I have to ask him, why me for all the good that's happened in my life.
Mhm.
And I often think of that when we're in that conflict of good and bad and how there could be evil in the world. And the more I explore, and especially with this podcast, the more I explore my spirituality and where God is taking me, the more I recognize that we as a human species have kind of hit the end of our physical evolution. And now we're seeing this kind of awakening of the spiritual and an evolution of our spiritual side. And these situations are kind of that spark to promote the change. We have a choice right now as a human species. How do we respond in these conflicts? And, do we go a path of allowing evil to occur, or do we go a path of trying to heal and bridge the gaps and come together? And I'm like you, I'm much more optimistic the more this kind of stuff happens in the world
Mm,
because I know it's pushing us to be better people.
mm.
And so, how do you feel changed from your experience?
Oh man. That's a good question. I feel way less fear to just go after. Hey. Uh, I don't know if that was like um, the intended outcome of change, but I definitely feel like a stronger sense of like I can just if I'm really inspired and curious and wanting to go after something, I just feel like a lot less of a sense of fear. A simple
It's
answer, but I think
uh,
my time over there was pretty obviously. Maybe it doesn't seem that obvious, but it was stressful. And especially as we got closer and closer to the eastern part, it's like not only is like are we getting closer towards danger, but it's like my body's like kind of running on fumes. And I'm with my wife, and we're with a full team of people that have families, and it was just a little bit of like an underlying stress situation. I think that I don't have here, and I realized that it's kind of like a stupid fear to like be rejected by somebody or to be like misunderstood in some way when there's like real danger out in the world. Does that make sense?
it makes perfect sense. And yeah, I see where you're coming from with all that. I keep in my head going back to, this is the first real I mean, we've had some conversations relating to your trip going over there in and
So,
around that period of time. But yeah, the majority of, I think, the conversations we've had over the last, how many years has it been? About 15 years since I've known you, since I was training you. That's mostly been circling around wrestling and
yep.
sports and everything else. And how do you think wrestling prepared you for this?
Oh, huge, right? I think it's like the mental edge that I got from wrestling. I pretty much owe like any sort of like grind or grit mentality to the sport of wrestling. It's like it totally changed my life and pulled me out of a place where I definitely could have gone down like a road of kind of like, just like a party route and like basically just like goofing off. I could have easily taken that route as like um, probably at the end of middle school. But then getting into high school, it's like being involved with Keeney and Chael and all the amazing guys that we had in the room at all phase. It just like was a big wake up call for me. And I also had a brother too that was like super inspired and pulling my ass out of bed at like 5 a.m. every day. And I mean, I just like worked my butt off for 4 straight years and then into college too. Um, but I would say the sport of wrestling really helped me just with the mentality of being able to persist when things got hard. Um, Running is really like a simple sport, right? It's just one foot in front of the other. It's like you can get into stride lengths and rates and explosion and plasticity and fashion, all that stuff if you want. But at the end of the day, like, you're putting one foot in front of the other, and it's like if you're running a marathon and you're not really caring so much that you're breaking like a 3-hour marathon. It's really just like a simple 1-2 cadence that you just need to kind of mentally get through. It's a simple action, but it's not easy, right? And I think the sport of wrestling really helped out with that, is that it laid a foundation for being able to endure hard things, even like simple hard things, which I feel like a majority of life is simple hard things.
As Dan Gable said about, once you've wrestled, you can do anything.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, I think for myself, I mean, as I grow spiritually, I reflect so much back on how, yeah, sport of wrestling for me, and I didn't do near what you did in the sport. Probably didn't take it as seriously as I might have been able to back in the late '70s. Um, but wrestling and sport and exercise physiology and all, the physical side of my life experience has so fueled my spiritual side. It's like
oh yeah,
strengthened
definitely.
me spiritually as well as physically.
And I think
So,
I think anyone lacking, or feeling lost, or anyone that feels like they want to awaken that spiritual side of themselves, I think physical is a great way to start. And I actually wonder if it is like the place to start with most people, because I think once that's firing, it allows you. I mean, it's all connected, right? It's like the more I learn, the more I realize it's all interwoven with each other, mental, physical, and spiritual. And it's just
right.
and I actually felt like a little bit more when I went into jujitsu. It kind of like maybe opened that part up for me a little bit more. I felt like with wrestling, it was like really nose, like grindstone. And it was like pressure versus pressure. But in the sense of jujitsu, it felt like I was just playing chess. And maybe it was a little bit easier because I was just, rolling with um, people that trained for that long. And then I'd go against black belts, and that was, a lot tougher. But for the most part, I felt like just this game of chess happening and like this expansion, not only like mentally, but it was like a kind of a spiritual experience too, being in a gym like that. Way different setting than wrestling.
And you decide to run into a front line of a major world war, not world
That's
war, but
right.
So as we start to kind of wrap up here, I know we could probably keep talking, and I know from a personal standpoint, I'd love to just stay on and keep chatting away with you, but some of that we probably wouldn't want to necessarily record. But what message would you like to leave our viewers and listeners with as we kind of bring this to a close? I always like to, and I'm going to put some pressure on you here. My other podcast, the Aging Well podcast, I can kind of end in my kind of cliche, keep aging well, but this one, yeah, there's no way to really do that. And I always kind of end up on some profound words from my guest. And so I'm putting the pressure on you to kind of just leave our listeners and viewers with some profound words of wisdom or, just encouragement or whatever it might be to just kind of wrap this up for today.
Okay. I'll just say what's on my heart. So, um, I would say that we live in the most amazing, flourishing time in the world. And if we're living in America here together, I would say that, we stand for freedom and for um, kind of the sovereignty of not only our nation, but we do stand for a little bit of freedom around the world as well. Um, I would say I would say that we're possibly the luckiest nation to have ever lived in world history. And not only am I appreciative of that, but I think Ukrainians also are incredibly appreciative of that too. They're fighting for their freedom as well. And everything that I've realized from witnessing over there in the war is that freedom does not come at just like a free cost. It comes at a tremendous, tremendous cost. And I think a lot of my generation has probably forgotten a lot of, what went into the sovereignty and the freedom of what it took to get America on its feet, and that was some pretty brutal wars that we weren't involved in. I would just say that we have this ability to be free and to advocate for people and to have a voice in this life. And I would just say to use it and to speak out against evil and put your foot down for good too. We have an opportunity in this life. I know it seems overwhelming with social medias, or maybe too many people have a voice right now. But, if you believe in something and you go for it and heck, you accomplish it, I'd say share it with the world and don't let that like little piece of knowledge and legacy just be left behind, because people are interested in it. It might help one person that really needs it at this time.
Great words. And I'm just going to end with that and just say thank you, Tyler. And, just keep doing what you're doing. You've been a person that has amazed me for all the years I've known you. And I just appreciate our friendship and the things that you're doing. And so thank you, and just keep doing it.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.